Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time talking episode 18 of Legends of Tomorrow called Progeny. And just by the title, you can kind of look at this as kind of referring to three different children in this episode. Obviously, Perdegaton is the big one, but if you think about it, and we also get to see Aldous Boardman, Hawkman and Hawkgirl's son from one of their previous incarnations as a kid this time. But in a way, it's also referring to Rip's son. I mean, one of the big things in this episode is, of course, the question is, if you could kill Hitler as a kid, would you? Per Degaton being the stand-in. I mean, Rip even flat out says, that in my time, you know, kids are taught about Per Degaton the same way kids in your time are taught about Hitler. Which, I mean, well, what do they teach the kids in your time about Hitler? I mean, I'm kind of imagining they probably don't forget about that guy. But okay, whatever. He would have been closer to their time and Rip's time, and thus a little bit more culturally relevant. So okay, we can kind of let that one slide. But anyway, of course, one of the questions that gets put to Rip when he's like, "Yeah, maybe I should kill Perdegaton," is, "Hey Rip, what would your son think of you murdering a kid, even if you knew it was someone who was going to grow up to be really awful?" And Rip kind of stuff is like, yeah, he probably wouldn't like it, but at least he'd be alive." That old chestnut. Um, Now, this whole thing of, I mean, as I said, this is basically an episode all about the question of would you kill Hitler as a kid if you could? And one, I'm surprised they actually brought Berdegadon on the show. When Rip mentioned him back in, I guess it was like the first episode or so, I kind of was wondering, like, is this somebody that might bring on a future season? Because in the comics, Berdegaton is a time traveler, an evil time traveler. Here, obviously, doesn't look like they're going to go in that direction, which is kind of a shame. I thought a team of evil time travelers would be a really great setup for season two, which is not to say that they couldn't still do it. They just probably wouldn't use Perdegaton as one of the characters. And not that there aren't other possibilities, but in any case, sorry, I think I lost my train of thought. But anyway, it is interesting to note that Protegaton's dad is this leader of this brutal police state, but he himself is like, yeah, no genocide. I'm not down with that, which I do think makes an interesting point. Like for example, at the end of the episode, he's willing to trade the team's lives in order to have his son back, which does show that yeah, he might have been a pretty unpleasant dictator, but that the guy did have some humanity still in him. And like this is, and his son is kind of a contrast to that. He himself is shown mercy by Rip, but this doesn't really affect him in any way. I mean, I love that scene where Rip has the gun pointed at the kid, and the kid's just like, "You ain't got it in you to kill me. I can see it." And that in a way does speak well of Perdegaton. That as a kid, he's able to read people that easily. But then again, having Vandal Savage as your tutor, well, you're gonna probably learn some skills. Not always have the best of educations, though. I mean, Savage's interpretation of Oedipus is rather lacking if you are actually familiar with the story of Oedipus. But anyway, once again, it's really unsurprising that the people who are even reluctantly in favor of let's kill the kid are Snart and Sarah. I mean, neither of them particularly likes this idea, but they're like, well, if this is what has to be done, it's what has to be done. Meanwhile, everybody else is like, no, we are so not doing this. Which kind of brings up an interesting point. Like, when I saw the preview for this episode, we get to briefly see Perdegaton on the Wave Rider. I'm like, oh, cool. Are they going to, like, take the kid with them and sort of, like, teach him to be a better person? Which, astonishingly, nobody even seems to float as an idea. Or, let's take him to the future and show him what would have happened, that we're telling him the truth. Again, no one seems to suggest this idea at all. But anyway, Speaking of Sarah and Snart, I do literally love the scenes between them. I like Snart just sort of sitting down there in the hole, messing around with a ball, feeling sorry for himself, and Sarah just basically goes and says like, stop being a whiny baby and go talk to him, talk to Heatwave, that is. And it does kind of speak well that Sarah is someone that Snart respects enough that he actually takes her advice. And that whole confrontation between Snart and Megan, them just saying like, okay, we're just gonna punch each other as a way of settling this. I mean, this whole we're gonna communicate with our fists. I mean, this feels like something out of a shonen manga. But under the circumstances, it does kind of feel like it would not exactly be totally out of place with these guys. And hilariously, it is worth noting that even Heatwave did seem to be kind of like, yeah, killing a kid's not very heroic. But it is interesting that in the end he wins in the fight against Snart and ultimately decides like, yeah, I guess I'm going to stay here after all. Which, okay, Heatwave's back on the team. A little bit probably not very well trusted, but he's back. He seems to be a little bit calmer, and he has all these skills he's picked up from the Time Masters, who have now dispatched these guys called the Hunters, who I'm not familiar with. I don't even know if they're from the comics. I get the impression not. Um, Not really much to say about that. I mean, until we get a look at these characters and see if they have like names or in any way connected to the comics, it's just sort of like, well, whatever. It's more dudes in armor with fancy weapons. Only this time they're gonna shoot to kill. Like, what the heck was Kronos trying to do? I mean, he was pretty clear that. Anyway, going back to sort of the main thing, I did like the flashback stuff with. It was cool. I mean, it was cool to see Carter in one of his previous incarnations, and it kind of really fleshed out what was going on more with Aldous Borman and all that. Back in from the earlier episodes, and just sort of seeing a little bit of what it was like for those two to live with that constant fear of Vandal Savage, and our foreknowledge that this is all going to end in some really crap, with them, of course, being murdered, just adds a lot of poignancy to it all. And then it kind of leads around to the present day where Ray is kind of like, they're having a little bump in their relationship, and he says to Kendra, like, why did I ever think that I could compete with Carter? I mean, you've chosen him like 200 times. And Kendra has that really great comeback of, well, that's true, but I've only ever met you once. And or this, I've never met you before, I suppose, is a little bit more accurate way of saying things. So them saying that, you know, despite all this past history she and Carter have together, that doesn't mean that she can't find something real with Ray. And you have to imagine, well, in all those reincarnations in the past, who's to say that they always did die at the same time? And, if that did, one of them was killed beforehand and the other one lived significantly after, well, there's no reason to think that they might not have found someone else. Um, Speaking of Ray, this whole thing of like, the Adams technology is corrupted into these robot things that are suspiciously like Omax, but not. I was kind of disappointed when like, man, it would have been so cool if they were actually Omax. Uh, and him kind of going through this whole, oh my god, I have a love child I never knew about. Well, okay, this is potentially interesting, but it's all completely cleared off the table by the end of the episode before it has any time to really go anywhere. And then the whole revelation of, what? Your ancestor is my idiot brother Sydney? Okay, so Ray apparent in the comics does not have a brother. He certainly does have a twin. And I'm sitting watching this whole scene. I'm like, wait a minute. This just feels like an awful lot like that episode of Futurama where we learn about Fry's, brother Chauncey, whom he thought was a big jerk. It's just like, seriously? You're pulling. I mean, this sounds like such a pull something out of your ass moment. Like giving Ray just this random twin brother out of nowhere. Just like, come on. Really? But then again, setting Ray's brother up as a potential antagonist somewhere down the road, that could be interesting. I mean, Kronos was more or less an Atom villain, and he's sort of been introduced there. Kind of giving Ray his own little rogues gallery, that would be kind of cool. Um, So let's see what else. Uh, it was pretty funny that Ray would choose Hannibal Lecter as as an alias, and it certainly is interesting that the lady mentions like, yeah, we don't really see very many people from Central City since it's under the control of the Star Labs Corporation, which does kind of bring back to some of the questions I've asked about the Flash, like who is actually running Star Labs? I mean, who is in charge? I mean, apparently Star Labs is still making money because the lights are still turned on, and we've even seen out there's a parking lot outside the lab that's all full of cars, even though apparently Cisco and Caitlin are seemingly the only people that actually work there. I just assume that those two and they do all of their Flash stuff on like a little wing or area that's closed off from everybody else, and there's just like other people doing real work in the building somewhere else who just never notice any of the crazy things that happen in that lab. But also, you notice how after all this time since the particle acceleration explosion, they still have not fixed the roof on Star Labs? Seriously. Uh, okay. Now, speaking of the Flash, this episode does kind of stick with that rule of if you try and mess with history, history will find a way to mess with you back. And bam, that does come true. I mean, they basically have Vandal Savage start rising to power 5 years early, which in no way, shape, or form actually changes the circumstances under which Rip's wife and kid die, even though you would think that would cause enormous ramifications. But it doesn't because that's the way storytelling needs to kind of work on this show, which frankly feels a little lazy, but simplicity, right? Simplicity. Um, I do have to say, this is another one of those movie episodes where we see the future and everything kind of looks suspiciously like an Apple store. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just like, this whole simplicity curves and all this other stuff. It was very influential in the design of Apple products and by extension the Apple stores. It does make a lot of sense and it is aesthetically pleasing, but it just kind of feels weird. We're so much these days. If you do see people go into a future time, the future always ends up looking kind of like an Apple store, and everybody wearing gray suits seems suspiciously common. It's just like, wait a minute, did everybody wear gray suits in Gattaca? Because that's what this is reminding me of a little bit. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with taking influence from Gattaca. It's actually a very, very good movie, but still. In any case, that kind of covers everything I had to say about this episode. So I'm going to call it here, guys. As always, please comment, rate, subscribe, and of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi and join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Till next time, take care and have a good one.